The Roman Empire was once a thriving and a magnificent civilization. Their empire expanded largely for hundreds of years and became the most powerful civilizations of its time. But as successful as they were, all great things must come to an end. Rome's peak came during the Pars Romana, or the Roman Peace, between 27 BCE and 180 CE. At this time, Rome had conquered most of the Mediterranean, as well as portions of Britain and Germany. Rome had a few threats on their borders, and conquest of new lands brought in vast amounts of profit for the empire. Rome's army was quite possibly the strongest in the world at the time. Many factors tied into the downfall of the Western Roman Empire. The Roman army simply ran out of land to conquer, and since conquest brought the empire resources such as labor, land, and natural benefits, therefore they lost their profits from conquest, and since their economy was underdeveloped when they went into recessions during the later Roman Empire, it severely weakened them.
Due to the stop in further expansion, finding military and new resources was difficult. This led to the increasing dependence on Germanic tribesmen. At first, troops started off all with Roman troops, and then the Western Roman Empire allowed Germanic tribesmen to join their ranks to keep other outside forces, usually other tribesmen, out. The troops became very mixed between barbarians and normal Roman soldiers. There were also several major plagues, meaning that there were fewer Romans to fill out the army, and more tribesmen were hired. Also, the Roman population never recovered from these. And less people means less taxes, and that made the Roman Empire economy unhappy. The normal conception of these barbarians is that they destroyed the outer borders of Rome, invading and ravaging the land. However, this wasn't the case, as the tribesmen did more infiltration than simple destruction. They would be brought in as soldiers and then demand more pay and power. Germanic tribesmen lacked discipline, and that was present in Rome's legions. These armies were often larger to control than usual, which often degraded the army's performance in battle. As the dependence on the outside help increased, the tribesmen found themselves in a better position to demand land and other goods. Germanic tribesmen tried to push themselves up into the political system in order for their people to hold power. This meant that the Germanic tribesmen increasingly contributed more and thus controlled more of the empire as time went on. An example of barbarians taking over the empire is the Three Sacks of Rome. The Visigoths were the first group to demand more power by rebelling in Adrianople in 378. They wanted higher salaries and power in the Roman system. They succeeded and took charge of Spain. The Vandals in 455 pushed towards North Africa and were given control of that part of the empire. However, a new emperor broke the promise of who had ownership of the land. The Vandals sacked Rome to get their rights to Africa back in response. Odoacer in 476 led his army to take charge of Italy, the heart of the Roman Empire, after a dispute over pay for his services. Such behaviors were extremely common for Roman troops rebelling to gain pay. Based on these evidence facts, Rome was infiltrated by the barbarians, then being destroyed from the outside.
Roman troops often demanded increases in pay when they felt they were not being paid enough. Septimus Severus, one of the later emperors, reportedly said to his heir, "Pay the troops, nothing else matters." This would become a massive drain on the Roman economy, along with an increasingly large and corrupt bureaucracy. The Roman economy was fairly underdeveloped, especially in the western half of the empire, where urbanization was quite recent. You can see that on this map here. Many of the cities are located in the eastern half of the empire. Without continuing conquest, Rome lost a primary source of profit in its economy. Without this profit in the economy, the underdeveloped economy was heavily affected by the recessions, which became extremely hard to recover from. Economically, Rome ran into troubles in the late 200s and later. A policy of devaluation led to massive inflation of the silver denarius coin, which presented major problems as more and more coinage was demanded. By the late 4th century, one of the new solidus coins was worth around 45 million denarii, which were effectively no longer in circulation. These coins here are Antoniani pieces worth 2 denarii. Taxes rose throughout the late empire to pay for the larger army and officials. These tax rates rose to extremely high levels, which meant that peasants, in many cases, could not afford children, etc.
The economic troubles of the peasants led to the emergence of large landowners as an extremely powerful force. Fleeing peasant farmers became tenant farmers. on the land of a few extremely wealthy senators and other such rich families. These farmers rapidly experienced a massive decline in their rights as citizens, and eventually became tied to the land and the landowners. These landowners continued to become more and more powerful as the core of the empire, and thus its army and control weakened. They became the only source of protection for much of the empire, and self-sustaining communities developed around the estates of these landowners. In addition to the tenant farmers, other professions also became hereditary. A series of reforms passed by Diocletian prevented any mobility between professions for all professions where it was deemed necessary, mostly those related to farming.
Much of this instability in both the economy and the military was due to a series of civil wars known as the Third Century Crisis, where the empire was split repetitively, with some emperors lasting substantially less than a year. These civil wars did permanent damage and ended for a while with Diocletian, the last of the soldier emperors.
In 284 CE, Diocletian split the empire into two halves, the east and the west, each ruling independently from each other, but still considered part of the Roman Empire. In 476, the Western Roman Empire fell, but not the East, which fell 1,000 years later. The East fell later because of their geographical location. They were closer to the Silk Road, so they had better access to trade and materials. Second, they also had less frontiers to defend. The Dam and at the time the West had to defend the Rhine and the Danube. The East had the Persian frontier to defend as well, but at the time the Persian army was also on the decline. In both sides there were barbarization in the army. However, in the East, after the Battle of Adrianople in 376, Emperor Theodosius ordered to kill all barbarians in the East, while in the West he formed a treaty with the Visigoths that they give a number of their soldiers to the Roman army annually. In other words, the East reduced barbarization, while the West kept barbarization of the army.
We can also see these chain of events that led to the downfall of other empires, such as the Han Dynasty of China and the Persian Empire. The Han Dynasty lasted for as long as 4 centuries, but there were many problems at the end. Like the Romans, they had many economic problems. The peasants were extorted by officials, and the rent for land grew increasingly higher. There were also problems within the imperial families. As per normal, emperors had concubines would ensure them to have male heirs, but that also meant having different families. Therefore, there were many succession battles which veered away from the more serious problems, the growing power of local elites. Generals gained a lot of loyalty and power from large armies, which they'll eventually use to fight the central government. Also, bureaucrats were basically the new feudal lords. Remember the Warring States period? They also collected taxes for their own benefit and did other immoral things. So no matter what, there wasn't any centralized power. They were all fragmented. And when the Han Empire fell, it was then divided into 8 pieces. In the Persian Empire, the land was divided into 20 pieces, or satrapies, and were governed by satraps. Like both the Chinese and Roman empires, there were many succession disputes between the satraps, and since each satrap were equipped with their own army, there were an increasingly growing number of civil wars. Later on, satraps became an inherited position and were less loyal to the emperor, and because of the military unrest, it put a dent on the Persian economy. The tax flow was mostly focused on paying for all these wars, and in result, not good for trade, among other things. Because of the constant troubles, including the Germanic tribesmen who invaded and infiltrated the empire, corrupt men, and economic problems, it was essentially only a matter of time before the collapse of the empire. And when did the empire collapse? Many consider it to be 466 CE, when the last emperor, Romulus Augustus, was overthrown by his Germanic troops. But because of all these different factors that happened at different times, historians argue for a definitive date. It really just depends on how you look at it.